Thank you all very much again for participating in our loved ones group. And the session that we're going to talk about now is entitled 10 Things That a Family Member Can Do to Help Someone Who Has a Drinking or Drug Problem. And before I go into that, I just kind of look again where we have been in terms of our discussion. We've talked about the disease of addiction, looking at the alcoholic or addict as a sick person, not a bad person, the progression of the disease. Then we talked about the experience of what hitting bottom is and how consequences are so vitally important to that process of a person making a decision, that they're willing to, they want to make a change. They're willing to get some help, for the problem they have. And that the key to that being that family members, play such a vital role in all of that. I mean, we may look at the different things that are going on in the addict's life and say, well, they've got all these friends, they've got employers and spouses perhaps and kids and all of this, but we know that if you're in this room participating as a loved one, or if you're watching this on tape, we know that you have a real interest in this, which also means that you can have a real impact on this as well. Oftentimes we see that family members become concerned about perhaps making changes because they know that there are other family members or friends or others that will step in and kind of fill whatever role that they maybe have stopped doing. So if I don't give the addict money, somebody else will. But even at that, that's we understand that. We know that we can't control everything around us and all the other people. It can be helpful if you get more family members kind of get on the same page, at least in terms of trying to do this and trying to be helpful and trying to essentially say we're going to stop this enabling, this rescuing process. But even if you're the only one that does it, it will have an impact. Because you will be able to tell the truth, you will be able to change what your role is, and that means that whatever you were doing has to shift to somebody else. And sometimes when that shifts to somebody else, they're not willing to do it for as long as you did it. And they might not definitely do it as well as you did it. So that can be something that is experienced. Sometimes we were talking about that critic or the backseat driver, the person that's willing to kind of stay out of the situation but wants to criticize. Well, let them become the primary rescuer, and sometimes they don't like that job at all. And they don't play that role very, very well or for very long. So don't be discouraged if again that you decide to make changes, if you decide to change the role you're playing in this crisis, to say no when it all happens, and that you don't see immediate change in other people. Or don't be surprised if you find yourself becoming criticized. Being criticized because you're changing. Maybe the rest of the family who are, again, set in their roles don't want you to change. They don't want you to do anything different because that may mean, again, that the responsibility starts coming to them. They may be the one that's having to say no when it's so hard to say no. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of talk about some very specific things. But before I start kind of listing these things off and talking about them, I want to kind of preempt that by saying that these are goals. The things I'm going to list right now are goals. I would not have an expectation that starting, tomorrow you're going to do all of these things and going to change everything and make this, this tremendous, adjustment in the way that you're leading your life, the way that you're interacting with your loved one. Look at them as goals, because what you're going to find is that in many ways you are just as powerless over the alcoholic or addict as the addict is over the drug. You're going to experience that. We would love to see the addict be able to say no to taking the drug or taking the drink. But again, they're powerless, and they're growing more and more powerless all the time. Family members experience exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing in terms of I make a decision to say no, and then I can't, or I don't, or circumstances somehow change and I find myself extracting another promise, or maybe I did half of what I decided I was going to do. And that is normal. That is very, very normal. This would be a good time for me to do to kind of give a plug for a very important organization, and that is Al-Anon. I would highly recommend that any family member who is trying to interact and try to deal, especially trying to change our behavior as we interact with the addict or alcoholic, that you find yourself an Al-Anon group to participate in. Because saying no and making these changes is going to require a lot of change within yourself, and it's going to be a very hard thing to do. And you need support for that. And within the Al-Anon program, you're going to find people that have actually done the kind of things that you're thinking about doing. So again, as we look at these 10 things I'm going to list off, let's think of them as goals, things that we would want to work toward. In the beginning, it might be a matter of just exploring what these things are, trying to see, well, how is it that I'm a part of this disease in terms of the crisis that happens? What role do I play when there's a problem? How am I perhaps propping up this alcoholic? We know that the addict needs a safety net, that the whole experience of drinking and drugging is different when you don't have a safety net. If I'm walking out of the house tonight to go drink, and if I get picked up for your DUI, nobody's going to bail me out of jail. Nobody's going to pay my fine. Nobody's going to make excuses for me. Nobody's going to bring me cigarettes down to the jail. Nobody's going to put money in the commissary for me. If I know that, because I've experienced it, that makes drinking different. That makes walking out the door to get drunk different. It may not cause me not to drink or drug that night, but it's going to make it different, because now all of a sudden I'm living with that feeling of impending doom. Now, a lot of folks live with that feeling of impending doom. That's all it is. It's just a feeling. It's kind of a nagging bad feeling. Something bad's going to happen. If you're an addict, an alcoholic, something bad is going to happen. It's not a matter of am I being paranoid. No, something bad is going to happen, especially if that safety net does not exist. And people will recover sometimes. That can be bottom for some people, is that real discomfort, knowing that my life is I'm going to be experiencing more and more consequences, and nobody's going to be rescuing me from those. That can be a real turning point for someone. But again, they have to experience it. They have to experience that. The first thing that we look at in terms of the things that you can do is the first one is probably one of the most important, and that is learn all you can about what addiction, alcoholism is as a disease. Really get familiar with this, just like you would any disease. If your loved one came home from a doctor and says, I've got this disease, you'd want to know all about it. You wouldn't know all about it. You wouldn't say, well, I already know all about that. No, you would want to know the facts. You'd want to talk to the professional people. You'd want to get information, and especially with this disease, because I don't know anybody that doesn't have an opinion of what alcoholism is. And, we grow up with that somehow. We develop these opinions about it, and most of our ideas about it are wrong. They're just not correct. And so because of that, then we have to challenge that, and we have to challenge that with good information. And again, that's what we've been talking about here, is getting information. So if you're participating in this, then you're taking that first step. Another thing that happens is the more that we are able to accept this as a disease, the harder it becomes to rescue. The harder it becomes to play into the drama. And again, that drama can be so very painful. So very painful. You ever feel like you're just involved in a script, like you're on a soap opera? The crisis starts, and I say no, and they say this, and I say that. Pretty soon it's like you're reading off a script. I can tell you what we're going to be saying 10 minutes from now, because it is just like that. And again, that's part of that is because we don't know what we're dealing with. We just don't understand that this disease is predictable. It has symptoms. Some of those symptoms are very ugly. Manipulation is one of those symptoms. Getting me to essentially play a role is a symptom of this disease. It's not your loved one. It's not who your loved one is. It's the person that your loved one has become as a result of this disease. So learn as much as you can. A good place to learn about alcoholism, addiction, and recovery is by attending open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. Open meetings are open to the public, and oftentimes these meetings you will be able to see people who are recovering, and that can provide hope. But also you want to listen to their stories, because in every story that you may hear of somebody who has recovered, you will hear that description of how either I got into some jam that my family couldn't get me out of, or at some point in time my family quit. They just quit. They stopped doing it, and I was experiencing the consequences. And I was really mad about it. I really was angry at that judge for sending me to that program, or my family member that wouldn't come and get me out of jail, or the loved one that wouldn't give me money. I was really angry at them. But people in recovery will also report those are the very people that I went back to later and thanked them for saving my life. And again, that is how it works. But again, if you're only in the middle of the crises all the time, if you're not experiencing someone who is recovering, you need to have that experience of being able to see people who are getting better. And again, to hear that story and understand that somewhere along the line somebody did something really hard that helped this person. And it had to do with stopping those enabling, that crisis rescuing behavior. Number 2 is don't rescue. And again, to be able to answer that not rescuing means that you have to really explore what is it that I do to rescue? What role do I play? Because sometimes it's not as clear as you might think. Sometimes it can be kind of mysterious in terms of what role is it that I'm really playing. Sometimes it might just be the pretending that we do. And now think about that. We find ourselves engaged with somebody who has a serious disease, but much of the time we might be pretending that it's not there. So we have, I was talking to a loved one recently, and they were saying, we got a holiday coming up, and I'm really concerned about what it's going to be like having, my addict, relative there, and what they were essentially saying is, while they're there, we've got to all pretend like there's no problem. We all got to pretend. And they might be high. They might be, really sick while they're there, but we're all going to try to pretend. But again, that's what we fall into as family members. We fall into this pretending, that the disease isn't there. And that might be one of the ways that we are rescuing. We give this person that feeling of everything's normal. We're going to sit around, enjoy this holiday together, and we're not going to mention that this person might be dying. That this person might be within, a day or two or whatever of some real crisis that's going to, have a tremendous negative impact upon them and the whole family. But that pretending might be a part of that. And definitely the other things, of course, that might be identified as rescuing. Don't analyze the loved one's drug or alcohol use. Don't analyze their drinking or their drugging or the things that happen to them. Don't try to analyze the drama. It will absolutely wear you out. Have you ever had any of those long, late-night conversations where you're sitting down and it seems like you're having this heart-to-heart talk with your loved one and everybody's sharing and maybe everybody's talking about bad things against each other, but somehow in the course of all of it, in the course of the tears and all that, you kind of come out of it feeling like, wow, we really got somewhere tonight, only to find out that the next weekend it's all gone again. That analysis, trying to figure out, why does my loved one drink? Why does my son, daughter, husband, wife, grandparent, why are they taking drugs like this? And again, when you ask that why question, that's when you open the door for the drama. Because the only answer to the why question is, why does the addict drink or the alcoholic drink, and why does the addict use? Because they're an addict, because they're an alcoholic. That's what addicts and alcoholics do. That's why they drink and use. There is no other why answer. It's not because of the way they were raised. It's not because of how you were as a parent. It's not because of how you are as a spouse. It's not because of their job. It's not because of the kids. It's not because of some traumatic event that happened in the past. It's not it. Now again, that's the kind of that romanticized version that we see around addiction, which isn't true. It's not romanticized, but we tend to romanticize it. Again, like the country western song. My wife left me and I started drinking. I bet you were drinking a little bit before she left. And again, but we turn that upside down. We romanticize these things. Look at somebody's life who has an alcohol or drug problem, and we're always looking at that life saying, well, maybe it was this, or maybe it was that happened. Maybe it was this interaction here. Maybe it was the stress that they were involved in. I heard somebody describing a drug problem that existed with a professional athlete recently, and they described it, well, it was because of all the pressure they were under, because of being a professional athlete. No, that's not it at all. It has nothing to do with it. It may have gained them access to some very good drugs, having all that money, but it's not why they are addicted. They drink or use because of their disease. And all the other is just the drama that goes around it. And it may contribute. Again, we know that as stress builds up in the alcoholic or addict's life, what do I do to relieve stress? I can drink. I can use. But it's not because. It is another, the stress is a consequence of the drinking or using. So try to avoid the analysis. Another reason to avoid trying to analyze why does the person drink, why is this all going on, is that oftentimes the blame will end up back with you. Remember, we're dealing with a manipulative disease. So if we end up in those big conversations about why are you doing this, what's happening, talk to me, share with me, what you're probably going to hear is that the disease is going to maybe in a very cunning way, shift that responsibility to other people. It's this that happened, it's that happened. I'm unhappy because, I'm drinking because I'm unhappy. No, you're unhappy because you're drinking. Again, it's very important to get the right cart, behind the horse in the right way to be able to understand addiction. If not, you'll be very vulnerable to being manipulated trying to analyze this. Because if it turns out to be somebody else's fault, even a little bit, then that kind of excuses what's happening. Plus, it might make you responsible to make you feel kind of guilty that maybe you really ought to help me in terms of these. Questions or comments about what we've talked about so far? Again, just jump in. Just jump in. Don't make idle threats. Avoid making idle threats. They don't work. It's much better for a real consequence for addiction is when the predictable becomes unpredictable. In other words, oftentimes people will say, well, I left the loved ones group and I decided I went home and I told my loved one that has a drug problem that I'm not going to give them money anymore. Now, that's not going to help you not give them money. Telling them that's still going to mean that you're going to have that moment that you're going to have to be sitting there saying no to the request for money. Making a threat, I'm not going to give you any money anymore, is not going to work. You're still going to face that moment. I think a lot of times we make threats hoping that if I make the threat, I won't have to face that moment when they come to me asking for money and I have to say no and they tell me what horrible thing's going to happen to them as a result of saying no. Well, the drug dealer's going to kill me. I heard that one recently, And so it was like, I need $500 to go pay this drug or they're going to kill me. And they were faced with that. And they just, the week before, said, we're not going to give you any money. But that was a tough one. The reality turned out to be is that the drug dealer they owed money to owed $250. But they asked for $5. So they paid the drug dealer off, bought drugs, and now they have a new credit account that they can work back up to $250. That's what happened. But again, it was a threat. It was an idle threat. If the most effective thing for the addict to experience is a surprise, no threat, I just show up asking for money like I always have, and I don't get any. That can be a tremendous turning point for a person because again, what I'm counting on as an addict is that you are going to stay the same. Everything in my environment is going to stay the same. People aren't going to change. I can come to you and get money. I can come to you and get sympathy. I can come to you and get a place to stay. I can come to you and get groceries. I can come to, I need all of that to stay the same. When things start changing, all of a sudden that's a tremendous consequence. Again, it's like losing the safety net. But a surprise is better. And oftentimes, though, we give these threats in the hopes that we won't have to. They're going to take action based upon that, but it won't work that way. You will have to follow through on whatever you think you need to. If you think you need to cut off the money, then you're going to have to follow through on that. Threatening it will not do any good. The disease is just too powerful. It's just too powerful. The person has to experience it. I saw a saying one time, it says, reality is when it happens to me. And that's it. It's not real until it happens to me. And again, with this disease, that's exactly how the addict experiences it. Not because, not because they don't care about you, not because they don't have any feelings. It's just that the disease has control of them. As the disease progresses, the addict becomes much more self-centered. That's another symptom of the disease. And it's not who your loved one is necessarily. It is just who the disease is. It's what's making them into. And self-centeredness essentially means I can't see how my behavior is affecting you. I can't see it. I may be doing these things that are having a tremendous negative impact upon people around me. I just can't see it. Plus, I also think that the world revolves around me. I really believe that that's really the way it works. And the sicker I get, the more I see it that way. I'm at the center, everything's revolving around me. So anything that happens that says that's not the truth helps. So when you don't respond by giving me threats and I get surprised because you quit rescuing, you quit giving me money, you stop those things, then all of a sudden I don't feel the center of the universe, and I can't recover as the center of the universe either. One of the things that will have to change in order for me to get well is that I'm going to have to become open-minded to suggestions from other people. And oftentimes that open-mindedness starts in the midst of those crises, consequences, bad things happen. That's when I become a little bit open-minded to listening to what other people may have to say about what might help me. Don't extract promises. It's a waste of time, and it's a waste of energy, and it's going to hurt your feelings, and you're going to get really mad. An addict, as their disease is progressing, cannot keep promises and will progressively become worse at it in terms of keeping promises because they don't know that they're powerless. When I'm in the middle of this huge crisis that you're going to get me out of, that you're going to rescue me from, I'm tremendously grateful, I'm tremendously relieved, and I really mean what I say I'm going to do. I really mean it because I feel great that I'm out of that problem. But I don't realize that I have a disease and my disease is not going to let me go that easily. It'd be the same that if I had cancer and I was trying to treat my own cancer and I said, I really had a bad bout of fever and this and this and this, and that fever's gone and I'm feeling better today. Isn't it wonderful? Well, you might say, yeah, but if you're not doing anything about your disease, it's going to get worse again. And that's the same here. The addict is living, trying to survive these events that are happening. And again, if we extract promises, the person cannot keep them. And again, and progressively will be less able to keep those promises. It's not because they don't perhaps want to. As the disease finally reaches perhaps its later stages, the individual may be making promises even knowing themselves they can't keep it. But it's become part of the pattern of interacting with the family and other people. You like to hear promises, I'll give you one. It makes you feel better, If you give me money and I make a promise, that makes you feel a little bit better about giving me the money? Okay, we'll play that. It becomes, again, part of the script, part of the drama that just plays out. This may be a hard one. Don't preach or lecture. Don't preach or lecture. Especially if you get information like you're getting now. It might even give you new fuel, that you say, okay, I'm going to go home and I'm going to set my loved one down. I'm going to tell them all this stuff that I've been hearing. It won't do you any good. Again, as we've talked about before, telling the truth can be very helpful. But if it's in that preaching or lecturing kind of way, it won't be heard. If you're really angry at me if I'm the alcoholic in your life and you're really, really angry at me, that feels bad, but I can deal with it. I can deal with your anger because I know that on the heels of your anger, you're going to feel sorry for me and I'm eventually going to get what I want. Same thing happens to me when you're lecturing me, when you're preaching at me. I can just shut it down. Most of the times I know that if you're going through all the trouble of preaching or lecturing me, that all I have to do is wait you out, and at the end of this sermon, at the end of this lecture, you will give me what it is that I want. It's the price I have to pay to get what I need. And I will listen to it. That might be my style as I just kind of listen to it. Other people might, other alcoholics might just completely reject it and tell you that they're not going to listen to it. But if I really need what you have, then I will probably listen to it. But again, it has no impact. Again, it usually just comes out of our own frustration, our own fear, our own real desire to help, because we see this person is progressing in such a bad way toward all kinds of problems or death or all of these things that happen eventually within addiction. And we really want to do something to change it, and we think that this is going to do it. And again, the problem with it is that it kind of sets up that pretending, the idea that, I told him all this, now something's going to change. But it's not. It won't. It doesn't change anything. Again, try to avoid anger. Anger is to be avoided because if you experience anger, you're guaranteed to experience pity. And pity will undermine everything that you've tried to do. Anger then, again, becomes a very manageable thing for the addict. You're yelling at me, and I can yell back at you. Or I'll sit here and take it, and wait for you to say something that you shouldn't say. Have you ever been in an argument with an addict and at the end of all of that you're apologizing? Some bad thing has happened and you're confronting them about it, but in the course you have gotten so angry, you've said things that the next thing you know, you're apologizing to this person for the things that you said. And again, that can become a part of the drama as well, is that I know that you get really frustrated, you get really angry, you get really afraid, and the next thing you know, you are going to say something that I can latch onto. And you may say 10 things that are absolutely true and one that's not, and guess which one we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about the one that really you shouldn't have said, or the one thing that you don't have proof to back up. Again, arguing with an addict or an alcoholic is a losing cause for you. You will lose every argument. Why? Because they don't argue fair. Because facts don't matter. Truth doesn't matter. What you saw doesn't matter. Alkalogic rules. Alkalogic rules in every argument with somebody with an addiction, which means is that A plus B does not equal C. A plus B may end up anywhere, absolutely anywhere. And again, the addict is seeing the world upside down. I'm drinking because of my problems, not that my problems are caused by my drinking. I'm seeing everything upside down. I see other people as to blame. So I can argue with you and accuse you and find fault with you and turn this argument around. And you also oftentimes hear family members saying, you know, after talking with this person for 20 minutes, I felt like I was the one that was crazy. That's a common experience because that's what it feels like. Because you're trying to be logical, you're trying to make sense, and you're dealing with something, it's like throwing paper into a fan. You throw a fact into that fan and it just shreds it up and puts it out in some other form. So again, finding yourself in a position of getting angry with the addict is going to pretty much guarantee that they're going to get what they want because it sets you up. It sets you up to say something that you don't mean, to make an idle threat, to do something that you're not going to follow through on. And then it's also going to mean that even if you do want to follow through on it, you're probably going to experience that pity that's going to come in, and just like having your feet on sand and a big wave comes out, it just kind of washes you out. You've had those experiences where you were certain that you were really going to follow through. You meant it. You'd had enough. But then a little time passes and you start thinking about, this is happening to them and that's happening. And the next thing you know, you're making changes in your own thinking and probably getting ready to extract a promise in terms of what you're going to ask them. If they'll do this, then you will help them. Don't financially support. Addiction, alcoholism lives on money. Alcoholism a lot of times doesn't need a lot of money. It doesn't need, in other words, alcohol is pretty cheap. So the person that's primarily alcoholic may not need a lot of money to buy alcohol. That might not be much of an issue. But they're probably going to need a lot of money to take care of their family, if they have a family, to pay that high-risk car insurance, or to get out of DUIs. They're going to need money for all the things that kind of encircle their life. Because the money, they're making bad financial decisions. They may not be able to work, or they're not working up to the level of their spending. It might be a part of it. They're not making good judgments about life in general. So they need a lot of support financially for all the mistakes that are taking place. And again, so with alcoholism, you will generally find yourself supporting a lot of this. You see grandparents that are essentially taking care of the grandkids in terms of all of their needs. You see people that are paying bills. You see alcoholics that are living in the home because they can't be independent, because they can't support themselves. Again, that's all financial support. With drug addiction, now we're talking about something that is very expensive. If your loved one is into cocaine, crack cocaine, the opiates such as Oxycontin or heroin, these drugs are expensive, and it will bankrupt you. These drugs can absolutely bankrupt you because they cost more than most people who are working all the time could afford. So you start to see, again, the person is going to be stealing from the family, going to be stealing from others. They're going to be creating legal consequences that have to be taken care of. They're going to be writing bad checks, running up credit card bills. They're going to be doing all kinds of things because the cost of these drugs can be from $100 to $200 a day easily. Easily. And that's not counting all the other problems that are being created. That's just the cost of the drug. So how are they going to afford that if they're not even able to work? Well, it's going to come from the family first, and then again, it's going to spread itself out to include other people if necessary. But the lifeblood of addiction and alcoholism is money. Without this, then we start to see that becomes a tremendous consequence that can lead to recovery. We've seen people recover simply because they could not get the drug. We've had people come asking for help in terms of treatment simply because their drug, the family was not supporting them financially. They may have had a place to live. They may have had other kind of things. They may not have been in legal trouble, but they couldn't get the chemical anymore. So every day it was a matter of getting up and how do I get $100 to go out and buy a couple of pills? How do I do that today? And you do that day after day after day. And again, sometimes that's bottom for some people. Just that, they can never get enough. They're not getting enough of the chemical, maybe even to get that wow experience. Maybe they can't even get the wow high experience anymore. But they need that chemical to not be sick, just to have some semblance of normal. So when the money cuts off, oftentimes that can lead pretty quickly to somebody, again, having that experience where they say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I can't afford the chemical. I can't afford it. I can't support my family. I can't keep gas in my car. Without the help of these other people, without this flow of money. And for many people, the flow of money becomes that which tells me that things are normal. I had a family member, again, we were talking one time, and they said that they just couldn't understand why their loved one was not taking action, why they weren't doing something. And we explored it a little bit, and they had a 22-year-old son that was living in the home, not working, still had access to drugs, because they had access to cash through the family. And it was like, well, why would this person? This was kind of like an alcoholic addict's dream. I'm living in home, in a nice home, because their parents had a nice home. I have a big screen television set. Parents go off to work every day. I get high. I sleep on the couch. It's a pretty great life. Why would the person take action? There's no consequence there. So again, financially, that support, whether it be, housing, food, direct money, paying bills, putting gas in the car, fixing repairs. Also realize that any money given to an alcoholic or addict is really going for drugs. That's where it's really going for. If you give me money to buy groceries, even if I buy groceries, that freed up my money to buy drugs. And most likely it won't go to groceries anyway. And so you need to be suspicious about any car repair. Bill, I've known people who, these cars, they should have looked like a brand new car for all the stuff that was fixed, yet it still won't run. Why? Because all that money went for drugs. That's where it went. And so again, the financial pipeline is something that every family has to look at. Because as long as that money's coming, I can get access to the chemical, I can make my life look a little bit normal, bad consequences aren't happening to me. Don't accommodate the disease. There was an old children's book that was written one time about addiction, and it was called An Elephant in the Living Room. And what it essentially was about, it was just a little kid's book, but it showed this elephant in the living room of this house that nobody was talking about. And everybody was changing their lives in order to accommodate the presence of this disease. In loved ones groups, we've heard everything from the spouse that said that she set her alarm clock every night at 1 o'clock in the morning so that she could get up out of bed and go into town and drive her husband home from the bar because she didn't want him to get a DUI. And that was her life. That was her life. Husband gone every night, getting up at 1 o'clock, going and getting him because she wanted to avoid him getting a DUI, getting thrown in jail, killing somebody else, with an automobile. But again, she was accommodating the disease. Parents who lock their purse and all their belongings up at night because they know that it'll be stolen if not, because they have an addict living in the home with them. People who change, you start changing your life, and it happens slowly, kind of subtly, that these changes happen. Family members report not taking vacations forever because, well, we couldn't leave town and leave that person. Even if they weren't living in the home, there might be a crisis, and we have to be there when that crisis happens because, that's our role is to do that. We will have to be able to step in and do our thing, when the crisis. But there's hundreds, thousands of ways of accommodating this disease in terms of how do I change my life so that you can keep on drinking and using? How do I change my life so that you don't experience consequences of your drinking or using? And again, family members, without even knowing it, over time will find themselves making all kinds of room for this disease. And because of that, again, the addict is in a position of essentially being safer, because they're not going to experience their disease, and they're also not going to have any insight into the things that they're doing to other people, because other people are changing in order to allow this disease to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Finally, what we want to see, of course, is for family members to be able to recapture their own lives. That is a very powerful thing. Now, family members usually, when I say that, think, well, I can't go on with my life until this problem's taken care of. I can't sleep well at night. I can't go on vacation. I can't enjoy my other family members. I can't do those normal things in life. I can't go back to my hobby. I can't take this other job. I can't do these things until this problem is resolved. Well, that's what addiction loves to do. It takes people hostage. It's already got the addict hostage. Now it wants to take other people hostage. And as a part of that taking hostage, again, family members essentially back away from their lives, and they become part of the drama. Become a part of the drama, an actor in the play of the addict's life. And again, the addict is going from crisis to crisis, creating all of this swirl. It's like a tornado. 12-step recovery groups talk about it as a tornado going through the lives of others. Well, the family members are the others. And as a result of that, you lose your own life. You quit. You spend all your time thinking about this person. You can't be happy unless they're safe. Your whole life tends to hinge on what's going on with them. And again, that may be normal considering what is taking place in your life, but it plays right into addiction. Remember that self-centered part. I can remember somebody said that their loved one who had a drug addiction and they eventually recovered was so surprised one night when they called them and they weren't home. And the next day they said, I called you last night, where were you? And they said, well, we went to a movie. Really? It was shocking. Well, but I called you last night. I needed you. And so, but those are the exact kind of things that the addict needs to experience. The addict needs to experience that people are not going to participate in the drama of addiction. And as that drama of addiction expands, it becomes more and more important for people to say, no, I don't want to be a part of that. I want to try and recapture my life. And again, it may seem selfish. How can I enjoy my life when my loved one is suffering so? Well, again, that may be a hard question to look at, but the reality is that your loved one will have a much better chance of recovering if we recapture our own lives and go about trying to find ourselves, the kind of things that we enjoy doing with our lives. Plus, it will make you healthier. You will be healthier emotionally, you will be stronger emotionally and spiritually if you are feeling better, and that will make you give you a better chance of doing the things you need to do to more effectively deal with this disease. When you're beaten down and you're tired and you're living from crisis, when you're anticipating that next crisis, you're set up to fail. You're really set up. How hard is it to say no? It's like you're saying no to this huge storm that's just going to wash you away. But if you start taking care of yourself, and again, start finding ways to recapture your life again, then that becomes very important in terms of being able to help your loved one. Sometimes that means that you have to reconcile family problems. One of the things that addiction loves to do is it loves, and we talked about triangulation, where we see that addiction loves to pit family member against family member. All these conflicts that start. Parents that can't get along with each other because they're fighting over, what to do about the child. In-laws that are fighting back and forth because they're disagreeing on how different family members are dealing with this problem that exists. Addiction just loves for all of that family crisis to be going on because it means that there's less likelihood that the addiction will get addressed. So one of the things that family members may have to do is to start reconciling family differences. In other words, if parents can say, we have a marriage to protect here, and if we can strengthen our marriage, we'll be much more effective in dealing as parents, with the person, our loved one. Or if other family members can, again, reconcile those problems, then people can get on the same page. Sometimes that's a first step for family members in terms of kind of recapturing their lives as well. Let's quit fighting with each other so that we can more directly deal with this disease. Let me stop there and just see what kind of questions we might have about this part of it.
Do the pulses of the addict or
The question being is that the promises that come, that the promises that the addict might give, does that reflect what the expectations are of the family members? And I say that's absolutely true. And again, it's part of that, the disease of manipulation. What is it you want to hear me say? And if I think that your idea of my life being intact or healthier is that you expect me to get a job, or maybe even go to counseling. I might say, well, I'll go to treatment, because I know that that's what you're wanting to hear. I don't really think I need treatment. I really don't want it. I really don't plan on putting much effort into it, but I know that that's what you're wanting to hear. So absolutely, that becomes a direct connection. I know what you want to hear, and that's the promise that I'll make to you. And if you give me something new, and again, you may give them something new. Treatment may be something you've not thought of. You may have talked about job and taking care of your family and getting out on your own, going back to school, whatever it may be. And when you start introducing treatment, that'll be resisted big time. But again, that eventually may be part of the promise. And there's nothing wrong with somebody going to treatment, but you got to be careful that promises don't prevent you from following through on whatever action you've decided. If I'm not going to give money, I'm not going to bail you out of this, and you're promising me to go to treatment, suggest go on to treatment. I'm still not going to give you money. And if the person really wants help, they'll get the help without the money, because they're not conditioned upon one another. But yes, absolutely, a direct connection between the promises and what I think you want to hear. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
Is it uncommon to see more than one addict in a family?
Is it common or uncommon to see more than one addict in a family? It's very common to see more than one. It's the disease, the presence of that physiological difference is hereditary, so it's very common that there's going to be more than one person affected. Sometimes families are riddled with addiction, absolutely riddled with addiction. Other times it might be, just one child among many, or one family member among a larger family. But most typically, you will see, more than one because of the hereditary nature of it. And in this particular, and again, based upon the amount of awareness that a family may have, to be able to identify that kind of early sometimes is important. Again, based upon our definition, I might ask some family members. It's not uncommon for a family member to come to a loved ones group and say, "I know that this one particular loved one's alcoholic," and as they get more information, they say, "Oh, and this other family member," because now their definition of addiction's changing. It wasn't just the one alcoholic matched their definition of what they understood. But now that they're starting to see, there's a broader definition here, then they start to see other family members, maybe earlier in the progression. But yes, definitely, it's a hereditary disease, so it's not uncommon to see that. Sometimes you see this generational alcoholism and drug addiction that really has families beaten down. I mean, they're beaten down economically. There's been a whole pattern of enabling. I didn't learn to enable and rescue because of the kids I had. I saw it in my family. I saw other family members, that playing these roles, through generations, and that becomes particularly hard for families to kind of break, because it's become the culture of the family. Is that there's a lot of alcoholism or drug addiction, and those who aren't alcoholic or drug addicted, here's how they respond, to that. And that's become a learned behavior, all along, maybe from childhood. Yes, other questions? Anybody? Yes?
Are there ways that are more effective than others for a parent to address, say like a teenager, while you still have some control and authority over their life? At the onset, if you suspect that the child is beginning to use drugs, how would you approach that child? Well, are there ways that are more effective to bring up the subject? Would you say, I'm concerned about this, let's make an appointment for counseling, or just what would you...
The question being, what's the most effective way of approaching perhaps a teenager that's in that beginning, they're starting to use, there's reason to be concerned maybe because of a family history, or something. How do you approach that? And I think that, again, the sharing of that truth is very, very important. And the more that you can be very straightforward with that, we tend to kind of put it in, well, all kids do this. We tend to, and maybe all kids do it, but some kids are going to have a problem with it because of, again, the physiological nature of the disease. And so I think, yes, being very straightforward, in terms of if you see a problem, letting consequences being experienced early. A lot of families say, well, we know this problem might be going on, but they're still allowing them to get their driver's license. They're still allowing them, they're still allowing them to do all those other things knowing that this problem exists. So trying to stay focused on, here's what I think is going on, oftentimes here's what I know is going on, and then to be able to be truthful and allow consequences to happen. The sooner it starts to happen, the better. Because we know that consequences are the key to somebody making a different decision. And a lot of times with teenagers, the consequences have to be brought to bear by the parent. It's not, they might not be driving a car and getting DUI, they might not be getting kicked out of school, or they might, but sometimes it's just the parent is the one that's going to say, I know you're drinking and using, and here's what the consequence for that's going to be. Other questions? Yes?
I have a question that I just probably have maybe a personal story of just listening to this. When our son was going through all this, we decided we had talked to somebody down the street about it, first time we came out. So as a parent,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Absolutely.
It's hard to make
That's a powerful example exactly of how, and what I thought was interesting is that you weren't even talking to the addict, your son. Your son wasn't in the car with you. But yet there was this, it was almost like he was, like he had this